The Atlantic triggered an online debate with an article titled, "Let's Declare a Pandemic Amnesty." It called for forgiveness rather than accountability for the public health and political establishment on the way they handled the COVID-19 policies. According to Dr. Kheriaty, however, accountability is needed. Dr. Kheriaty is the former director of the Medical Ethics Program at the University of California, Irvine, and author of the new book, The New Abnormal. We speak with him about where the medical establishment is heading with new powers created under COVID-19, historical examples of how the Nazis used similar policies under the Third Reich, and where the world is heading if nothing is done to stop the rise of a new medical tyranny. Hey, Dr. Kheriaty, thanks for being here.
Thanks, Josh. Great to be with you again.
Yeah, it's been a while. I think last time we talked was when you were having this whole spat with the University of California, and it's been a long road for you, actually.
It's been an interesting
year. I want to talk to you. Yeah, for all of us, but I think for you especially. And you've been kind of the canary in the coal mine when it comes to what we risk with the whole COVID-19 pandemic. I know you did this new book about the biomedical security state. It's called The New Abnormal. And it seems that everything you warned about previously is, in fact, coming to pass. And I want to go into this with you. I mean, just kind of laying out the stage. We recently saw this Atlantic piece calling for amnesty over the pandemic. A lot of people came out and they were very unhappy about it. They said, no, we do not need amnesty. We need people held accountable lest this happens again. And it looked for a bit like the pandemic was done. It looked like everything was over. And then all of a sudden, they're coming out with all these new announcements suggesting that they are going to do it again. I want to ask you, I guess just from the top, what's going on right now?
Yeah, so this question of pandemic amnesty, which was a proposal published in the Atlantic Monthly, saying, look, we didn't know, especially early in the pandemic, what we were doing. And so it's time to forgive and forget and move on. And there's something very appealing about this proposal. Certainly, we're now living in a society where people are deeply divided. And many of those divisions have to do with families divided or friendships ended over disputes about COVID pandemic policies, essentially. Whether someone was going to be invited to Thanksgiving dinner if they hadn't been vaccinated or refused to wear a mask, this sort of thing. So society is hurting in the wake of basically everything that we've been through in the last 3 years, from lockdowns to mask mandates, vaccine passports, and of course the fear of the virus itself. And so it's a really important question. How do we heal and reunite the social divisions that have come about because of our response to COVID? So I'm in favor of reconciliation and I'm in favor of forgiveness, but it has to be done with integrity. It has to be done right. And so my worries about the proposal for amnesty as it's been articulated is a plea that, first of all, we didn't know what we were doing. But the fact was there were a lot of people that did very early on call into question many of these policies, from lockdowns to school closures. There were critics, but those critics were sidelined, were marginalized, were vilified. And, in some cases, many of those people actually lost their jobs, their livelihoods. So it wasn't just a matter of ignorance. It was a matter of a very deliberate effort to censor certain voices that were not going along with the mainstream public health narrative. Yeah. So people didn't have access to one side of the debate. We ended up with a false scientific consensus, or a false appearance of a consensus projected toward most members of the general public, unless they were digging deeper and reading the Epoch Times or watching your show or looking to various voices on Substack to get a different view of what was happening. So amnesty, no. Forgiveness and reconciliation, yes. But with forgiveness and reconciliation, I think we could take a cue from the Truth and Reconciliation Commissions that society engaged in after South African apartheid, for example, or following the Rwandan genocide. Obviously, situations in which there were deep wounds, deep social divisions, very serious wrongs had been done, and people had genuinely suffered, massive injustices. But the Truth and Reconciliation Commissions, to be done with integrity, had to begin with truth. There was no reconciliation without a public acknowledgement and a public owning of responsibility for the harms that were done. And that's what we didn't see in the Atlantic piece or similar commentaries. What we saw instead, I fear, was not a request for forgiveness following an apology for harms that were done, but we saw an attempt for many in our public health establishment to sort of forgive themselves and to sweep the harms under the carpet, yes. Right? So for authentic reconciliation, you have to begin with truth and acknowledgement that wrong was done. You also have to make efforts to rectify those harms.